Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So I'm curious, is there anyone out there who, like me, actually kind of likes getting a chance to go to a funeral? Donna, a couple? A little bit. Kind of likes getting a chance to go to a funeral. It's not everybody's kettle of fish, I have to agree. But I find, even though the reason that we're there is sad and hard and awful, that I always walk away feeling better than when I arrived, feeling transformed, feeling my grief turned, from that sense of hopelessness to something else. And I've thought about this a lot. And I think it's because at a funeral, and it doesn't matter if it's someone that I only know a little bit or someone I know a lot, I always learn something new and amazing about that person that I didn't know, or something that maybe I had a glimpse of, but I did not really realize how profound of an impact this part of them had on the people around them. It could be, one of the ways that they served in the world, or one of the things that they did within their family, or just another aspect of their professional life. But there's always this piece. And it's something that says to me, you know what? Life, it can be short. We don't know what our time is, and I need to make the most of it just like this person did. And I go forth and I'm a better person for that. And the interesting thing that I've also noticed is it's not just me. Because funerals, there's the service. But then after the service, we all go stand alone together with people we don't necessarily know. I mean, there's usually a receiving line. There's often a buffet line. We sit down at tables. There's often not enough space. Because you never know how many people are coming, right? And so there's a real mix of connecting. There's this really unique community that is created oftentimes just for that one moment in time. Because this is all the people from all different walks of life that we're connected to and influenced by this person and their presence and place and love and life in this world. And as you're standing around with everybody, you start to talk about what you heard and how it's affecting you and what you didn't realize. And so the community, this special community, is changed and is going to go out and be different in the world. We all leave kind of carrying a renewed take on some part of what that person had given us. If that person was someone who gathered and fed and nurtured, you leave thinking, I can do better at that too. I can do more of that, because they won't be there to do it as much anymore. If this was the person who really held the family together, that matriarch or patriarch role, you might feel like, I guess I can step into that and make sure that we still stay together as a family now that person's not there to do this. Or if that person was someone who had a powerful impact on the world, maybe they fought for justice, or they did some acts of profound service or advocacy or love in the world, you feel like, I could do more of that, so that fight that they fought can somehow continue. It's, I think, true that everyone leaves feeling more kind, more just, more merciful, and more capable of being all of those things out there. And I think that's what I love about funerals. That's what makes them transformative and ultimately sacramental. So I was watching last season of one of my favorite TV shows, 911. It's a silly show about firefighters in Los Angeles. It's by the same people that made Grey's Anatomy, so lots of drama, lots of high drama. And the new season started this week, so you gotta catch up, right? You gotta remind yourself. So I watched through the entire season, and I think 3 nights. He was in England, lots of time on my hands. And you catch the arcs differently. So there's this one episode where the fire, the 118, this fire crew, is called out to a funeral where a car has driven into the funeral home. So this is the disaster. Everything happens with disaster. I know Susan's giving this look like, oh my gosh. Anyway, they get there and they rush in with all their equipment and their airbags and their, the jaws of life and everything, because they need to help rescue a woman who's been pinned under the car. She was one of the attendees at the funeral. She was sitting in the front row. She's now pinned underneath his eye. Yes, it sounds really scary. Don't worry, they get her out, and one of the firefighters is checking her over, taking her pulse, making sure she's fine, mostly, cuts and bruises. He still recommends, don't worry, ma'am, I think you're gonna be fine, but I want you to still get in the ambulance and we'll take you to the hospital anyway. We want you to be checked out. And as he's doing this, he looks up and he sees the picture of the person they are celebrating at the funeral. And he's kind of taken aback, and he's like, oh, I'm really sorry for your loss, ma'am. I know it must be especially hard to lose your twin. Well, she looks at him and she says, no, actually, that's me. This is my funeral. I know. He was really taken aback by that too. So it turns out that this particular woman knew that she was going to die. She had a chronic illness. I forget which one, but something where she knew she was coming close to the end. And she had been working with someone called a death doula. Has anyone heard of a death doula? Yeah. I didn't know about it until I saw it in this show. But anyway, it's somebody who walks through this process and helps to facilitate it for people in kind of some of the same ways that a doula at a birth does. And this doula had suggested that she have the funeral before her death because, you can see the rationality of it. Why bring everybody together when you're not there to enjoy it? Wouldn't you rather have a chance to see all your loved ones and everything before you're gone?
Yeah, amen.
And you can see that. There's one side to that. And I get that desire. And there's a lot in there. But there's another piece of me that asks, would the funeral be able to do that thing that I was talking about earlier if we were sitting in the room? If we were still there at our own funeral? Would people be able to reflect on the person who was going to pass and say all of those things, how much they love them and care, in a way that would have the same impact? Or would it be hard? Would it be harder to say that with them sitting in the room? And would you feel like you were still very much taking care of that person rather than having an opportunity to sit in your loss with people and try to figure out what they meant to you and where the path forward is? It's harder, right? I'm not sure that it would quite work in the the same way. I'm not sure that it would have the same healing, because there's still this grief anticipated in there, right? Still the grief anticipated. It's tough, right? It's a tough question to ask. So one of my commentaries suggested that the Gospel of John, and that scholars think that the Gospel of John and the letters, the epistles to John, arise possibly out of the same authorship, but definitely for the same audience, the same unique Christian community. And that this community has a unique take on the meaning of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, and how we are called to respond. So today we get this beautiful, beautiful sort of summation of all of that coming from Jesus. And it's the last teaching that Jesus gives publicly in John's Gospel. The very next thing Jesus does after this is he goes with his disciples up to celebrate the Passover, and they start washing each other's feet at the Last Supper. So this is pretty much his last public teaching. And he says this beautiful thing about how a seed has to fall, it has to die into the earth, or else it's just a seed. It's just a seed. But if it gives itself up and dies, it then blossoms, it sprouts right into something new. But then there's this next piece, because not only does it sprout up, because that kind of agricultural image is there in a lot of what we read about Jesus talking about his death and resurrection. But here in John, it very explicitly goes further. It sprouts, and this new plant bears much fruit, something new, something complete. There's a whole cycle here. And I think it's very reflective of how the self-giving that Jesus has modeled for us is given to us in John's tradition of the gospel and the good news. Because Jesus tells us a lot about how to really love God and neighbor, and that is in fact how we know God. And that the abundant community will then abide in God more richly and more fully. And humanity will become something new through that. Abide in God, and we will become more loving, more caring, kind, and just, more beloved community. And Jesus is pretty much saying, I hand this off to you, but you're going to run with it. I hand this off to you, but you're going to be the ones that take it and run with it. In other words, Jesus is making space. He's making space for the new humanity to struggle, because they do struggle after Jesus dies. I mean, that is really hard for them. But then to emerge like a new seed that will then become a plant and, as we know, bear a huge amount of fruit. Understood in this light, this whole process that we think of life, death, resurrection, new fruit that Jesus models for us, it's not just a one-time thing. It's not just a thing that we can say happened a long time ago, or that we check off in our life, like, I had my moment, I've had my transformation, aha, done. It's actually something that happens over and over consistently, both within the lives of communities and within our own lives, and happens generation after generation. God is continually drawing us to himself through Jesus. I mean, here we hear Jesus talking to his disciples about it. Earlier in our readings, we actually hear God talking about it to the ancient Israelites. 1,000 or more years before that. I will write on your hearts so that you will know me better. You will be my people, and I will be your God in a more full, more loving, more heart-centered way. And it goes on long past this. I mean, today we're celebrating St. Patrick. I love everybody's green. It's like a sea of green out there. St. Patrick, if you think about it, he lived in a time when Britain had been Christianized by the Roman invasion. It was a Roman, but Ireland was not. Ireland was not Christian, and Patrick was kidnapped when he was like a teenager, like 16 or something like that, and held as a slave or a captive in Ireland, forced to care for the sheep in the fields. And he manages to escape and get back to his home, and then later decides that he's going to return and share the love of Christ as he knows it in Ireland with the people who had been his captors. And that is transformative, just like all other times and places where this kind of self-giving happens that we know about across Christian history. But think about it, what's kind of interesting about this particular situation is that Patrick doesn't just replicate Christianity the way it looked in that very specific way, which was a lot of early Christianity was driven by the conversion of kings and emperors and rulers. Had this kind of top-down thing. I mean, there's another bottom side too, but generally that's how it happened. In Ireland, the Christianity that emerges, that seed that pops up and then bears fruit, becomes centered around these monastic communities. People living in communities, sharing love, being the centers of prayer and healing and caring, spread out into the communities from the bottom up. And that's shaped what we've inherited as part of our rich, all these different sort of manifestations of our faith throughout a long time. It's like this amazing cycle and all this flowering that's happening all over the place. People over and over, they're given the good news of God's love, they live it, and then they let those who have been loved by that good news then live it in new and more amazing ways. So I want to return to my TV show because, you know, it's an arc, these shows, and the stories keep going. That fireman who was helping the lady, he has a complicated life because I'm going to fully admit this show is basically soap opera with fire engines. So it's a little bit ridiculous. But this fireman, he's been through a lot in the last season. He had a near-death experience where he got struck by lightning, had this crazy coma dream. He's also in the middle of a process where he's helping some friends of his who were experiencing infertility, and he became their sperm donor. So there's a baby coming along, not his, but that he has something to do with. He ends up dating the death doula, because they have a lot to talk about from the death perspective, right? They connect really well, but they have a little bit of bumps and wrinkles because his life is complicated and dramatic, and she's not sure she's ready to go for it. And they've kind of had a fight. So there's this another episode where she comes into Harry's apartment to try to reconnect after they've had a bit of a split. And she walks in, and there he is in the middle of delivering this baby on his couch because TV, right? That all babies are delivered not in hospitals but somewhere else accidentally. It's not nearly as exciting if you just get to the hospital and do it the normal way. And she's in the middle of it, she's like, oh, what's going on? But she watches, and this is the first time that she's ever experienced birth after like a whole lifetime of watching death, a whole lifetime. She gets to see new life. But then she also gets to see this firefighter deliver the baby, but then he has to hand over the baby and say, here, this is your baby. And they become this new family and this new nexus of love and life and possibility and nurturing and all of that. It's a lot going on here, right? It's good, feel good. So there's all kinds of transformations coming on here, all kinds of journeys, all kinds of ways that love is seeding something new into humanity, this self-giving way that God in Jesus taught us to love. It's not a long ago thing. It's something that's happening here and now in our own lives, and it's happening in communities and all around us and in us. And the amazing thing is, as this new humanity emerges through seed and fruit and all of that, it's we all get to play different parts in it at different times. We get to do all of it. I mean, think about it. Sometimes we've been the ones who've been handed the baby, and sometimes we're the ones who get to be the midwife, or the one that supports. We get to be the nurturers, and sometimes we get to be the one who walks with someone who's going through sickness or trouble, the death doula, that side of it, the caring piece. Or sometimes we're the ones that are receiving that kind of care. We get all of those things. And each one creates a new nexus of love. Unless a seed of grain of wheat falls into the earth, unless we give that love, it remains. But we get chances over and over to both give in that self-giving way and to receive that and be transformed by it. And that, I think, is what Jesus is telling us today is the mystery of Holy Week and Easter, which is what we're coming up to. And what we do, let's face it, over and over, year after year, as if it's a thing that's happening all the time, that we participate in all around us. Amen.